Why silence can be more powerful than words. Nietzsche explains. Silence. A concept so often overlooked, yet one of the most powerful forces in human existence. We live in a world that constantly screams for our attention: notifications, conversations, arguments, advertisements, opinions flying from every direction. We are taught that to be heard, we must speak louder, argue better, and assert our ideas with force. But what if true strength lies not in the words we say, but in what we choose not to say? What if silence is the secret weapon that Nietzsche understood, a weapon that grants power, control, and even enlightenment? Nietzsche was no stranger to the power of silence. He lived much of his life in solitude, contemplating the depths of human nature. He believed that true power did not come from mindless chatter, but from the ability to restrain oneself, to master the art of silence. And here's the paradox: those who speak the least often hold the most control. Why? Because silence is unsettling. It forces others to fill the void. It creates mystery. It demands respect. Think about the most powerful figures in history: leaders, philosophers, thinkers. The ones who commanded attention were not those who spoke the most, but those who spoke with precision, with intent, and often with long pauses of silence in between. Imagine this scenario. You are in an argument. Your opponent is yelling, throwing out insults, desperately trying to prove their point. But instead of reacting emotionally, you remain silent. You let them exhaust themselves. You watch them grow frustrated by your lack of reaction. And when you finally choose to speak, your words carry 10 times the weight. Why? Because silence amplifies meaning. It forces people to listen. It transforms your words from mere noise into something impactful. Nietzsche understood this well. He saw that the most powerful individuals were those who mastered restraint. They did not waste their breath trying to prove themselves to the world. They let their presence, their actions, and their carefully chosen words do the talking.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But silence is more than just a tool for power over others. It is also a gateway to understanding oneself. In silence, we confront our thoughts. We face our fears. We are forced to listen to the voice inside us, the one we often drown out with distractions. Nietzsche believed that solitude was necessary for greatness, that only in isolation could one truly develop original thoughts, untainted by the noise of society. And yet, how many of us fear silence? How many of us reach for our phones the moment we are alone? We crave distraction because silence is terrifying. It forces us to reflect. It forces us to ask difficult questions. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I truly believe? What if everything I thought I knew was wrong? This is where silence becomes not just a tool for external power, but for internal transformation. When we embrace silence, we begin to understand ourselves on a deeper level. We start to separate our true thoughts from the opinions imposed upon us. We begin to think independently rather than echoing what we have been told. Nietzsche warned against the dangers of being part of the herd, of blindly following the masses without ever questioning why. Silence is the first step to escaping this trap. It allows us to break free from the noise of collective thought and discover what is truly ours. But here's the challenge. Can you sit in silence with yourself? Can you go an hour without music, without conversation, without distraction? Can you face your own mind without running from it? Most people can't. And that is precisely why those who can hold immense power. Silence is rare. It is uncomfortable. It is difficult. But it is also the birthplace of wisdom, strength, and self-mastery. Think about a moment when someone's silence spoke louder than words. But maybe it was a teacher who looked at you with disappointment rather than yelling. Maybe it was a friend who simply walked away instead of arguing. Maybe it was a leader who let their actions speak instead of their voice. These moments stick with us because silence has gravity. It creates impact. It forces people to lean in, to pay attention, to wonder what is going on beneath the surface. Now, ask yourself, how often do you speak just to fill the silence? How often do you react without thinking, simply because silence feels awkward? What would happen if you embraced the pause, if you let silence create tension, if you allowed it to give your words more weight? Nietzsche knew that true power lies in restraint, that the strongest individuals are those who do not give away their thoughts so easily. Words once spoken lose their mystery. But silence keeps people wondering. It keeps them intrigued. It forces them to respect you, even fear you. But this is just the beginning. If silence is so powerful, why do most people fear it? Why does society push us to speak constantly, to engage, to fill every moment with sound? And how can you use silence not only to gain power over others, but to transform yourself from within? The silent mind, how embracing stillness gives you an unfair advantage. Silence is not just the absence of words. It is a form of presence so intense that it can shape perceptions and decisions and realities. Yet, in a world addicted to noise, silence is treated like an empty void, something to be avoided, something unnatural. But what if silence is not the absence of something, but the presence of something far more profound? What if silence is the key to unlocking an unfair advantage in life, one that Nietzsche understood deeply? Nietzsche believed that most people live in reaction. They hear something, they respond. They are provoked, they retaliate. They are told what to think, and they accept it without question. This cycle of constant reaction keeps people trapped in a life dictated by external forces. But silence disrupts this pattern. It creates space to observe before reacting, space to think before speaking, space to decide what truly matters before getting caught up in the trivial. Those who wield silence with intention do not live in reaction, they live with purpose. They choose their battles. They conserve their energy. They do not waste their breath on conversations that do not serve them. This is where silence becomes an unfair advantage. When you are silent, people reveal themselves. In any interaction, whether in business, relationships, or conflict, the one who speaks first often gives away their position. They expose their thoughts, their emotions, their insecurities. But the one who remains silent holds the power. They become the enigma, the unknown variable. Silence forces others to fill the gap, and in doing so, they expose their true motives. Nietzsche understood this principle well. He recognized that silence was not passive, but active. But it was a tool of control, a way to dictate the flow of interaction without ever appearing forceful. Think about the greatest strategists in history, the leaders, the negotiators, the visionaries. They did not waste their words. They understood the weight of silence. When used correctly, silence creates discomfort. It forces others to lean in, to second-guess themselves, to wonder what you are thinking. And in that moment of uncertainty, you hold the advantage. This is why the most confident people in any room are often the quietest. They do not need to prove themselves with excessive words. Their presence alone commands respect. But silence is not just a weapon against others, it is a tool for mastery over oneself. In silence, you learn patience. You learn to observe without immediately responding. You learn to sit with discomfort instead of reacting impulsively. And in a world that rewards speed, urgency, and instant gratification, patience itself becomes an unfair advantage. The ability to wait, to allow time to work in your favor, and to resist the urge to speak or act prematurely, this is what separates those who control their lives from those whose lives are controlled by external forces. Nietzsche believed that most people never truly hear their own thoughts. They are so consumed by the voices of society, the expectations, the trends, the opinions that they never pause long enough to ask, "What do I actually think?" But silence forces this confrontation. It strips away the noise and leaves you alone with yourself. And for many, this is terrifying, because in that moment of silence, all the doubts, the fears, the insecurities rise to the surface. But facing them is the first step to overcoming them. This is why those who embrace silence develop unparalleled mental strength. They do not need constant validation. They do not fear being alone. They do not seek distraction to escape their thoughts. They have made peace with their own mind, and in doing so, they have gained an advantage that few possess. Imagine how different your life would be if you mastered this. If you no longer reacted emotionally to every comment, every challenge, every confrontation. If you could sit in silence, comfortable in your own presence, while others scrambled to fill the void. How much more control would you have over your own life? But here lies the deeper question: if silence is so powerful, why do we resist it? Why do we instinctively fill every pause with words, every moment of stillness with distractions? And how can we train ourselves to embrace silence rather than fear it? The hidden strength in saying nothing, why silence commands power over others. Silence is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is not the absence of action. In reality, silence is one of the greatest forms of strength, and those who understand how to wield it can command influence in ways that words never could. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He saw that true power was not in shouting the loudest, but in mastering the art of restraint. The world teaches us that to be heard, we must speak up, fight back, and assert ourselves constantly. But the ones who truly hold power are those who know when to say nothing at all. Think of a moment when someone's silence made you uneasy. Maybe in an argument, when you expected a reaction but got none. Maybe in a negotiation, when the other person simply waited, unshaken by pressure. Maybe in a conversation, when someone's quiet presence made you rethink everything you just said. The silence is unnerving because it forces people to fill the empty space. It makes them question themselves, doubt their own words, reconsider their positions. And in doing so, it shifts control to the one who remains silent. When you don't react immediately, you remain unreadable. You become a mystery, and people fear what they cannot predict. Nietzsche believed that most people are desperate to be understood, to be validated, to be acknowledged. They speak not because they have something valuable to say, but because they fear being ignored. And this desperation weakens them. It makes them easy to manipulate. But the person who does not crave validation, who can sit in silence without discomfort, who does not rush to explain themselves, this is the person who is truly in control. When you do not feel the need to justify yourself, you signal confidence. When you do not react emotionally to provocation, you show strength. And when you do not waste words trying to prove your worth, you reveal that your worth is self-evident. This principle applies everywhere, whether in business, relationships, or conflict. In negotiations, the one who speaks less often holds the leverage. They let the other side reveal their position first. They allow silence to create tension, forcing the other party to make the next move. In relationships, the one who remains composed has the upper hand. They do not beg for attention. They do not react impulsively. They let their presence speak louder than their words. Even in moments of confrontation, silence can be more powerful than the sharpest argument. But a well-timed pause, a refusal to engage in petty disputes, a quiet withdrawal from unnecessary drama, these actions speak volumes. But silence is not just about controlling others. It is also about mastering yourself. Nietzsche saw that those who could hold their tongue had already won half the battle of self-discipline, because silence requires restraint. It requires emotional control. It requires the ability to sit with discomfort instead of reacting instantly. And those who can do this gain an unshakable sense of power, not over others, but over their own impulses. Imagine how much stronger you would be if you were not controlled by the need to respond, explain, or defend yourself. But imagine the confidence of knowing that you do not owe anyone an immediate reaction. Yet, most people fear silence. They rush to fill every gap in conversation, but they blurt out thoughts before truly processing them. They react before thinking. Why? Because silence feels like losing control, when in reality it is the ultimate form of control. Nietzsche knew this. He knew that speaking too much is often a sign of insecurity, while silence signals power. Ask yourself, how often do you speak just to avoid an awkward pause? How often do you react emotionally instead of strategically? How much stronger would you be if you embraced silence instead of fearing it? But here's the ultimate question. If silence is so powerful, why does society condition us to avoid it? Why are we taught that speaking up is always the answer? And how can we use silence not just to influence others, but to achieve true mastery over ourselves? The ultimate power, how silence transforms you into someone others cannot ignore. Silence is not just a tool, it is a transformation. It changes how others see you, how you see yourself, and how you navigate the world. Nietzsche understood that silence was not merely about withholding words, but about commanding presence. A person who has mastered silence does not go unnoticed. They become someone others cannot ignore. There is a gravitational pull to those who do not reveal everything, who do not give away their thoughts so easily, who are comfortable in the space where most people feel uneasy. Silence forces people to lean in. It creates an aura of mystery, and mystery is power. In a world where everyone is desperate to be seen and heard, silence makes you stand out. People flood social media with their opinions, trying to make their voices louder than the rest. They argue endlessly, trying to prove their intelligence, their worth, their superiority. They speak not because they have something meaningful to say, but because they fear being forgotten. But the truly powerful do not compete in this noise. They do not rush to explain themselves. They do not engage in every argument. They do not need to be constantly heard, because their presence alone is enough. They understand that words, when used too freely, lose their value. But words that are rare, that come after deliberate silence, carry immense weight. Nietzsche saw that silence was not just about external power, but about internal strength. But to be silent when the world demands a reaction requires immense discipline. It requires control over emotions, over ego, over the need for validation. It is in silence that a person becomes immune to manipulation because they are no longer controlled by the need to respond. They do not let others dictate their emotions. They do not let external noise shake their inner stillness. This is why those who embrace silence develop an unshakable confidence, because their sense of self is no longer dependent on external approval. But silence does something even deeper. It sharpens the mind. When you are silent, you observe more. You notice details that others miss. You see the hidden motives behind words, the subtle shifts in behavior, the patterns that reveal deeper truths. While others are too busy talking, too distracted by their own voices, you are processing everything. This ability to listen, to see what is not being said, to understand beyond the surface, this is what gives you an advantage in every area of life. The most powerful people are not those who speak the most, but those who understand the most. And understanding comes from silence. Yet, most people resist this transformation. They fear that if they stop speaking, they will disappear. That if they do not constantly assert themselves, they will be overlooked. But the opposite is true. The less you say, the more people pay attention when you do speak. The less you reveal, the more people want to understand you. The more comfortable you are in silence, the more unsettling you become to those who are not. Silence is not emptiness, it is presence. And presence is unforgettable. So now, ask yourself, could you go a day without explaining yourself? Could you sit in a conversation and listen more than you speak? Could you embrace the pauses, the moments of stillness, without rushing to fill them? What would happen if you allowed silence to work for you instead of fearing it? Nietzsche knew that silence was the mark of someone who had mastered themselves. And those who master themselves master the world. If you can control when you speak, how you react, and what you reveal, you become untouchable. You become someone others cannot ignore. You become powerful not because you demand attention, but because you command it effortlessly. And that is the silent trick that gives you power.